Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode on TMJ's Political Current podcast. We are speaking with Louise Cansington, an activist and artist whose story has inspired many as she went from being a former Swedish Islamophobe, as she describes herself, to converting to Islam and becoming an avid and fierce defender of Palestinian rights. Today we're speaking with Louise about the rise of Islamophobia across Europe and the predicted effects of Trump's presidency on anti-Muslim hate in the Western world. Thank you again, Louise, for being my guest again. I know we had you on TMJ News several months ago, and while we were speaking in that conversation, I remember you were sharing your story about how you were a former Islamophobe who then became Muslim, and your story was very inspiring. I know your social media is full of, pro-Palestine content, and you are an activist in that sense, have garnered lots of attention and followers, and you have shared lots of meaningful content in that regard. I kind of want to use a little bit of your background to ask this first question, and that's about the rise that we're seeing in the number of reported Islamophobic crimes in Sweden, which is where you live, but also in countries across Europe. And one particular video that you posted, actually, which got lots of attention, students at a university in Sweden found bacon that was placed inside the Quran in a hate incident. You also had, lots of other instances in other countries. In Germany, for example, you've been having lots of police brutality, even police beating protesters to the point of unconsciousness. You even had cases where people's homes were raided simply for chanting from the river to the sea. A lot of these things have been increasing in Europe. You also had the EU Fundamental Rights Agency survey. That one said that at least 1/3 of Muslim citizens are finding it difficult to find jobs and housing. And I'm going to confirm this with you, but there was also a staggering statistic that came out about UK in specific that was saying that since October 7th, they've had a surge of Islamophobic incidents by 600%. Is that something that you have sensed? And, why do you think that's been the case?
I believe that Islamophobia in general it's political mind control. It is a way of controlling the political agenda. You need to blame someone to also rise someone up. So when you're going to be controlling a society of people who has a belief and who actually is in love with that belief, which Islam is a very loving and kind and peaceful religion, love is always going to be in the way of political power. And when love is in the way of political power, we have to destroy love. We have to make sure that the image of love is wrong. This is the mentality and mindset of the political leaders. So the mindset is
Right.
founded into the fact that they know that Islam and the Muslim community is in the way of political power. And this is not the first time that we're seeing this. This has actually been going on for decades and centuries. Muslims have always been in the firing line because, if you look at Islam as the religion itself, it never provokes anything that's harmful, not to the individual, not to any other individuals. It doesn't provoke war. It doesn't provoke any form of hate. It only provokes the well-living of the human being. And that is always going to be in the way of politics. This is the reason why politics is using Islam as an scapegoat to maintain political power. And every time we're seeing something happening, like you're mentioning in Germany and also in multiple other countries, also not even only in Europe, but also other countries around the world, we are looking at it. We are looking at it in a political perspective and not in a religious perspective. And this is exactly what they want us to do. They want us to focus on it as a political issue and not as the route to the salvation of love and a working community. Because if anybody, we all know, if you just read the Quran, if you just follow the words of the Prophet, peace be upon him, you know that the ways and teachings of Islam could actually create world peace.
Right.
But there is no world leader out there who is going to want world peace because that's going to be in the way of their agenda. So
Interesting.
Islamophobia
And
is
would you
actually not
say
even a
there's a
real thing.
particular reason?
It's not a real thing. Islamophobia isn't a real thing. It is a made up concept that is used to weaponize our minds and to control our political knowledge and how awoken we are about the society what we're living in. So let's just say an example. Let's use um, terrorism in general as an example. In Sweden now, we had this horrible mass shooting in a city called Örebro, committed by a Swedish man with Swedish background and no religious connections. And he went into a school, a komvux, and a school where people come to Sweden to learn Swedish, and started shooting people with different backgrounds from all over the world and shouted, "You should all get out of Europe." But the Swedish media refused to call this terrorism. But just
Right.
look at the facts and reality. If that man would have said Allahu Akbar before he did it, it would immediately have been counted as a terrorist attack. Even if the person wouldn't have said Allahu Akbar, even if the person would just have been a Muslim, would have been a Muslim, it would still be have counted as a terrorist attack, because that's what they want us to believe. They're always going to use Islam and any forms of peace as um, and to weaponize that against us. They're always going to try to convince us that what's good is actually wrong to maintain the political power they want.
Right. And one thing I want to follow up with you on this specific incident that you just mentioned, I also was reading about it online. And it's interesting because similar to lots of cases we see in the US, this man was actually identified as a lone perpetrator. And they also referenced the typical mental health issue excuse when it comes to, what he was dealing with. And interestingly, I had a hard time finding his actual name because it's almost as if there was a reluctance to say this man was, this white guy who, is not that typical image that we're used to perpetrating about what a terrorist may look like. I know one typical response that we hear within the media is, there's this almost clash of civilizations narrative where lots of Islamophobes are seeing Islam and Muslims and the way that they practice and believe as a direct threat to Western values. Would you say that is kind of the root of what we're seeing? Or, as someone who was on the other side, what do you make of that?
I would say that a lot of political anger is a reason for Islamophobia and xenophobia. And I don't even like the word phobia, because it's not a phobia. It is a phobia is when you're afraid of something, like you're terrified of something. If you like for me,
Right.
I have arachnophobia. I'm terrified of spiders. If I see a spider, I feel like I'm gonna faint. I feel like I'm going to die. I get a physical reaction from what I'm feeling when I'm seeing a spider. Seeing somebody wearing hijab doesn't get that reaction. It's not a mental fact like that. It's not a psychological reaction that affects your body like a phobia would normally regularly do. It is actually hate. It is something that is rooted into political anger, a political bitterness and hate, that we always need to blame someone for something. And when I was an Islamophobe, I had to blame someone for my life. I didn't have my own apartment. I lived off welfare. I lived in a terrible relationship. I Everything that in my social life was just bad, and I needed someone to blame. And I met other people who were also, you know, living under bad social circumstances in life, and they started talking about themselves and what they've been through, and they're like, "Well, why do the immigrants and the Muslims get everything for free? I deserve to get that too." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right. You do right. It's their fault." So it's mostly people today are so bad at taking responsibility for their own lives. They rather blame their problems on someone else instead of looking into themselves. What can I do to change my own situation? And sadly, also, once again, I want to apologize to everyone that I've ever hurt during this era of my life, because I'm not going to say it's because I wasn't feeling well. I'm going to say it's because I was a freaking idiot, because that's the truth. I was a brainwashed idiot. I took out my angers on these people. innocent, loving, caring, kind-hearted people who only wanted to thrive in peace. I made their life terrible because my life was miserable. This is the situation with the individual. If you
Right.
look at it from a mass political perspective, as mentioned before, I think it's about political power. You want to get rid of the thing that is in the way of political power. And when we look at political history, we're always going to see that peace is something that's always in the way of money and power. So we don't want peace, right? This is the view of the political world leaders. Peace is always going to be in the way of political power. So let's get rid of peace. Let's make sure we
Right.
find someone to blame. Also, once again, someone to blame for the personal gain.
Right. And speaking of that, that was actually a really interesting way of mentioning it. One other way that we're seeing the media cover this um, is that the rise in these incidents against Muslims is mirroring anti-Semitism. And this whole topic of anti-Semitism is actually something that's really interesting, and I want to get your thoughts on it. A lot of times we've actually seen, especially in Europe, since you're in Sweden, officials using anti-Semitism and the rise of anti-Semitism since October 7th to crack down on Muslims. For example, you had one member of the European Parliament who said on X that violent assaults, hatred of Jews, Islamist propaganda, and a society and division. This is what Muslim immigration has done to Denmark. So we see a lot of these kinds of sentiments being mentioned, especially by far-right politicians. And perhaps the first question we should be asking is, how do you even define anti-Semitism?
I want to just remind you that Semites are actually Arabs in general. Semites isn't a religious group of people. Semites is actually an ethnic group of people. So first of all, we have to just tear down the word and the meaning of the word.
Yeah,
Palestinians are Semites. I just wanted that said because there's a lot of people who are not aware of this. Um,
right.
first of all, I'm pretty disturbed by the fact that Jews are using the word Semite only to describe their own religion, because Semites can also be a Muslim Palestinian person.
Absolutely.
So
But I mean, the way that we see it, at least like portrayed in the media, when they mention anti
I
Semitism, they're always
understand, but we have
referring
to
to
inform, we have to educate people. What is actually what is a Semite?
Semites. Right.
Exactly. And this is actually number one, people are uneducated. And I was also uneducated. Before, when people said Semitism, I always thought it was only about the Jews. When I
Right.
started advocating and working for Palestine, I realized, wow, there's so much I wasn't aware about. And
Right.
also, I want to continue by saying that I have a lot of Jewish friends. I have multiple Jewish friends. I can even count them with two hands because I have loving, caring Jewish people around me that are supporting my cause and what we're all doing for Palestine. I know that this is not a war on Jewish people. It has never been, and it should never be, as well as it should not never be a war on Muslims or Muslim people. It shouldn't even be what it is in general. This is actually not even a war, it's a genocide. This is a direct attack on the Palestinian people, and it is a genocide. It is not between Muslims and Jews.
You mentioned how obviously this is not something that should be used to hate on the Jewish people, which is obviously something that pro Palestine supporters have fully, been mentioning from the beginning, that our issue and our protesting and our issue with Israeli influence in America and, in Europe and across the West isn't necessarily the issue with Jews. It's about Zionism, right? And it's exactly what you were mentioning. But
Yes,
do you think that there has been a rise in attacks against Jewish people in Europe since October 7th?
definitely. Definitely. And I think that's horrible. I don't think
Right,
the last thing the world needs right now is more damn violence.
right. And so, in tandem with that, which is something that we're seeing, the media also portrays this idea that the hate against Muslims is kind of mirroring the hate against Jewish people within European society. So, kind of to feed on that, as someone who, as you mentioned, you were a former Islamophobe, what do you make of this increase in hate against Muslims that you're seeing in Europe, and where do you see it going?
That educated, unreliable, unrelated news source. And I hope that activists all around the world will gather together to inform and educate people, and that it will decrease. that we will see less of it, that we will see less hate towards both Jews and Muslims. I hope that education can be the source, can be the main key to interrupt the escalation of something that is completely dangerous for the world right now. And I
Absolutely. And
hope that this is what I hope. I don't want to predict because right now the world is so rocky, the political situation and the environment all over, both the internet and also when you meet people in real life, it is so rocky and unpredictable. So I actually don't even want to predict. But my biggest wish and my prayers are always that education is going to win. And that means educated people from both sides, that we talk to both Jewish people and Muslim people, and that we actually give them a microphone and let them speak, and that we give the microphone to the right person, not the person who is working to raise more hate, but that we give the microphone to the people who is fighting for a peaceful society where we can live together, where we can work and function together in a society without hating each other or blaming each other. Because after all, most religions are funded in the teachings of peace.
that is absolutely right. And as far as predictions go, I know you mentioned that it's not easy to tell. One thing though that we have seen, and a lot of European outlets have mentioned this as well, is they've predicted that Trump coming into power in America will kind of have this ripple effect where it emboldens, far right politicians and far right people, even in Europe, to kind of increase
Yes.
their hate against Islam and Muslims.
This is
And,
true.
it's true.
I'm seeing that every day. Every day. Even in Sweden, I see our Swedish politicians, they're taking after Trump rhetorically. Also the way they want to change things in the country. Let's for an example, Trump banned TikTok, and all of a sudden the Liberal Party here in Sweden was like, oh, we're going to put in a petition to ban TikTok in Sweden too. And that was like a minor thing. That's just social media, but
Interesting. Yeah.
things are escalating. Trump is the world's most powerful man, but right now he's also the world's most dangerous man. Donald Trump is the world's most dangerous, powerful man. And he's basically satire to many people. But to me, I see that he's a character. He's influencing world leaders, and he's definitely giving hope to far right politicians all over Europe that, oh, if he can get that far, maybe we can too. And they're using him like as a pinpoint to, well, Donald Trump said we agree with him, and it escalates again. I do think that the election of Donald Trump becoming president of the United States is very worrying. Is worrying me a lot, and it is going to be very difficult 4 years.
Do you think, though, in terms of foreign policy, when it comes to foreign policy in relation to Palestine and the funding of Israel, do you think it matters who is in office in the White House?
Well, Israel owns the world. We're going to be honest with that. And I have no problem saying that on television because it's the truth. Israel controls the world. Whether you like it or not, it is the fact. They control politics, they control money. First of all, APAC has to become seen as a foreign agency. This is something that Jill Stein had in her agenda when she what was a presidential candidate in this election. APAC needs to be recognized as a foreign agency because as long as Israel has financial and political power within individual nations, and also by that, also in military structures such as NATO, etc., we're never going to be 100% individual. We're always going to
Right.
be we're always going to be sort of chained to the fact that whatever we do, we need to keep in our minds that Israel is always there. And this, we cannot let this continue. All countries needs to be individual nations. We cannot have a foreign power control our economy, our political beliefs, our religious beliefs, or the way we're structured. And it doesn't matter what country it is. I wouldn't want Norway to control Sweden either. But in this case,
Right.
it is a country or it's, as I see it, it is a recognized country by some who are committing a genocide. To me, it's equivalent to giving the National Socialist Party of Germany during the 30s political insight in the US. That's pretty much the same thing. We're talking about people who are burning children, who are slaughtering families, who are, chasing people out of their homes, out of their country. This is beyond a political frustration, or whether you are Democrat or Republican. This is a matter of genocide. We have reached beyond the point of what is reasonable.
You mentioned APAC, and one huge concern that people have is, APAC is always going to have that, stronghold on, the Western political influence. And that's something that, will never change. Do you have hope in terms of your activism and the work that so many are doing like you, that will ever change? Or are we looking at something that, is part of the Western political paradigm, is so inherent to it that it's almost impossible to change?
I already see a lot of change because of activism around the world. Things we didn't even talk about just 5 years ago are being spoken up out in the air as we're talking about what we read in the newspaper while drinking the morning coffee.
Right.
So things that has been almost like taboo before has become common sense and common knowledge in today's society, and that is because of activism. And I do believe that the masses can make more of a change that they themselves are aware that they can. I'm
Right.
just small little piece in all of that. I'm just 0.000 of billions, 1%. It is what we do together that actually has that strong effect. And if it wouldn't have been for activism, if it wouldn't have been for all the brave journalists in Palestine who also documented everything um, from Gaza, also in the West Bank, if it wouldn't have been for all the truth speakers out there, the ICC would never have ruled Benjamin Netanyahu as a war criminal. This is something
Right.
that we would not have seen 5 years ago. Benjamin Netanyahu from Israel being ruled out as a war criminal by the ICC. Could you imagine that happened 5 years ago, that it would happen now?
No, I don't
Probably
think
not.
anyone really. Yeah.
So we did that.
And you're
We
absolutely right.
managed to do that together. Imagine what more we can do. It doesn't stop here. We are not done. We're not finished.
We've also seen, in terms of statistics, a very large and significant noticeable increase in, even average Europeans, not just Muslim, gravitating toward the Palestinian cause and, actively protesting it within their societies. Obviously facing, repression and police brutality in the process, but nevertheless continuing that mode of activism. What are your thoughts on whether the public sentiment within Europe is actually shifting toward Palestine? Do you think that's something that is gradually happening, or do we still not see much of it?
I think it's gradually happening. Most definitely. Um, the people I talk to every day, just a couple of days ago, I spoke to a woman in Sweden. She's around her 50s. She was never politically involved in her life before. One of these people who called it a conflict, it's always been a conflict. It's always been that way, those two countries over there. She always had that mentality, as many people in Europe do still. And, and now she's on every protest. She's taking part in actions. She's even bringing her adult kids, and they are learning about it. I think the masses are right now controlling the narrative, which I see could be, or maybe also even will be, the awakening even of the political part of the society.
Right. And that's definitely really hopeful to see. One other question I had from you, which you've actually touched on as well, is we obviously saw that Trump, initially coming into office, made remarks about taking over Gaza and kind of relocating the Palestinians to countries like Egypt and Jordan. But would you say that this would not have happened under, for example, Biden for a Democratic administration? Because historically, though, we have also seen that many of the Palestinian land grabs have happened under Democratic administration. So obviously, Trump is a candidate or a president that does have that more, intense public sentiment against him.
I don't have anything positive to say about Joe Biden or Kamala Harris regarding the genocide on Palestine. Remembering how many Gazans and also West Bank living people and Palestinians in general lost their lives during their administration. I would say that they are as complicit to the genocide uh, as Trump are, by also the way that they have funded Israel with arms, etc. During their presidency, during their time. But I would not say that they would use the rhetorical sense of buying Gaza. But I would
Right.
not see them benefiting to Gaza either, because they already showed the world where they stand and where they stood towards the Gazan people. So I have nothing at all positive to say about the Biden-Harris administration regarding their actions on the Palestinian people.
Right. And to kind of wrap this up, I know a big part of your current activism and what you do is also your faith as a Muslim. And you have obviously, been Muslim for a little bit over a year now. How would you say that your faith has inspired you or had a role in the activism that you have today?
I get stronger. My faith is giving me inner peace, and it's giving me the strength to continue. That's I would say that that is the best way to describe it. I don't think I would have had the power in myself to continue do what I'm doing if it wasn't for my faith.
And
Um, and this is also the same faith that I've been seeing in the Palestinian people. Even when they lose a family member or when they're grieving as worst, they're still thanking Allah. And even in my life today, um, when I am experiencing hard times and when I'm, against standing in front of a situation that feels unbearable, I keep thinking about those videos of how close you need to be to Allah, not only when bad things happens, but always, and to never take Allah for granted.
absolutely. And one thing to kind of obviously finish this, if you were to look at Louise in 5 years, obviously you have a lot of your own work as an artist going for you. You have the activism that you're doing, the big social media presence that you have. How do you foresee Louise in 5 years kind of evolving and continuing her work in activism? Where do you foresee yourself being?
Well, hopefully, my dream is actually to travel to Palestine and to help rebuild. Um, More probably less social media activity. I am. I'm not interested in showing people what I do. I might as well just turn my phone off and just put it in my suitcase and go down to Palestine and help rebuild without filming anything, because basically they need us to all extent. And my dream is definitely to go down to Gaza, because I have a lot of friends there, but probably also to visit the West Bank and to help rebuild this beautiful country again, and hopefully entire Palestine when everything is free. I
Well,
could
thank
al-
you so much, Louise.
I could also see myself keep doing music, more maybe more music also for Palestine. And yeah, it's going to be a journey indeed. It's going to be an amazing journey for all of us. And I
That's
want
for
to remind
sure.
you, I want to remind everyone who's an activist out there that it isn't over yet, and that we're still fighting for the entire country and all of its people. And that whenever you feel like you're about to give up, think about the resilience of the Palestinian people and everything that they went through, and the fact that they're still standing. And so will we until the day of victory.
Thank you so much, Louise. That was a perfect ending, very inspirational ending to this interview. I'm really happy we were able to have you on again, and best of luck in all of your activism work.
Thank you for having me.
If you like what you see here at TMJ News, please like and share this video and subscribe to our channel for more engaging weekly content. TMJ News is a grassroots independent media outlet, and you can find ways to support us in the caption below. Thank you for joining us on this episode, and we look forward to seeing you next time.